international arrivals.
Welcome.
You have arrived at your destination.
I'm Emily Lutzker.
And I'm Anna Camasia.
Today, International Arrivals speaks with Mexican-born interdisciplinary artist Erika Harrsch, who's based in Cold Spring, New York.
Hi, Erika.
Hello, Anna and Emily, and hello, international arrivals.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. We're really happy to have you as our first podcast. I wanted to sort of focus a little bit on Mexico. You're born in Mexico City, correct?
Yes, I was born in Mexico City. Then I lived in a city northern from Mexico City, only 2 hours, called Querétaro. Then I lived a year in Italy. Then I went to San Miguel de Allende for 7 years. Then Germany for 3. Then San Miguel Allende again for 3. Then New York for 22, with an interval of on and off for 5 years in Brazil.
Wow. So you know, this podcast is focused around the idea of home. And immediately I think, so when somebody says, you know, where's home? What do you say? Or what place feels the most like home? And what does that mean to you?
It's very interesting because for years, I was having this feeling that home was my body and that I carry my home everywhere, a little bit like a snail or like a escargot, that basically you carry your home everywhere you go. Because living in New York City, with the whole situation of the rents and landlords and real estate voraciousness, you always feel in danger of losing home. Funny enough, I lived only in 2 places during these 22 years, and I only had 2 studios, meaning 2 different addresses. So that was very, talk about being steady. And so the place where I've lived the most in my whole life has been New York. So I guess New York is already home, but it didn't become home until I bought a property in New York. I decided to move to Hudson Valley, and I'm here in Cold Spring. I acquired a property. It took me a year and a half to remodel, remake it, save it. It was a house that was in really bad condition. So I became a unprepared general constructor and general contractor, but with a success story. Let's put it that way. I did a major gut renovation, and my studio and my house is right here now. Still New York. I still go to the city once, 3 times a week. So, but I would say for the very first time, I feel that home is this land. It's not that a city, even though I've been always a city woman, a city person. But I would say that I feel rooted. And why I feel rooted? Because finally I'm within an environment, an ecosystem of trees and plants and animals. So that gave me a sense of belonging. Interestingly enough, my last show in Mexico City, it was a solo show, was all related to trees. And it was the dream of the grand tree and the improbable objects. And funny that this project was going to become almost like a visionary Cassandra sort of prophecy of what it was going to turn into my life, what it was going to become my life. And home had always been a dilemma for me, having moved so many times from cities, countries, having lived alone and left my family since I was 19 years old, and being a very independent woman and very, the practice of being an artist. Basically, I started as a painter, so the practice is very, I always call it the the solipsistic, existence of the painter. It's very solitary in a way. So the sense of home and the sense of belonging was, as I said, always a dilemma. For years, I kept on asking people, if a UFO suddenly lands in front of you and these creatures come out and tell you, come with me, but we're not sure if you're going to go back, if we're going to bring you back, would you go? And pretty much 98% of the people always answer no. And I always answer yes. And for the first time, I feel that I'm not so sure if I would go.
I like this idea though of like home being in your body. I was just reading, Bell Hooks has a book about belonging, and talks about kind of trying to find a place to be and a place to belong, but that it's connected to the land. And so this idea of, like, she talks about walking and making food in the land and making a space for yourself in the land. And she's kind of gone on this journey where she returns home to where she grew up. And so then about the significance of the earth beneath her feet and walking in that space. And when we were talking earlier, you talked about gardening, and I wondered kind of if you could talk a little bit more about your connection to the land in terms of making your own space in that, not just the house, but other ways that you interact with the space around your house, maybe?
Sure. I would say COVID was a catalyst for change. The first 3 months, I went to Mexico during the craziness of New York. I was with my parents, and I tried to be with them, preparing them and protecting. And, I was pretty afraid for them. I'm only child, and my parents, are not young anymore. So I went there, and basically we were locked in a house with beautiful garden. So I was doing gardening literally most of the day. So I was only doing gardening and cooking. And I bought a book from Byung-Chul Han, a philosopher, Korean German philosopher, that it's called Oda a la Tierra, Regreso al Jardín. So praise to the earth, the return to the garden. Probably that might be the translation to English. It's originally written in German, and I read it in Spanish. And basically, Byung-Chul Han, that was his last book before the pandemic. He decided to get a sabbatical year of just gardening. Quit everything, quit philosophy, quit teaching, quit writing, and just dedicate to gardening.
Oh, wow.
And he devoted, that in Germany they have these gardens and, these very small pieces of land that you can get, rent, or inherit. And then you just plant flowers or veggies in accordance to the seasons. So that's what he did. And he called it My Secret Garden. And I read the book, and it's a music, philosophical gardening book. And while I was doing all my gardening, I was literally, cutting the grass with scissors on my knees, because I was not going to allow with COVID to get the gardeners. So I was pretty strong and muscular, and I planted trees, I moved, I did a lot of things. And I read the book. So I knew that I needed to be close to land. I needed space. I needed green. While we're talking, I'm watching from the window, beautiful forest. So it was, as I said, it was a premonition. It was, it really dig in my soul and my heart in a good way, and made me wanted land, wanted field, wanted green, wanted sky. And forever, my work has always been related to the sky, to flight, to movement, to ethereal. And my last solo show was about rooting, and it was all related to surrealism and trees and feminine. And it was all related to how our identity gets, it's always rooted by very first life impulses and memories. And it's very linked also to surrealist poetry, surrealist movement, surrealist artists. There's a big study on the big glass of Duchamp, the grand glass, related to my own personal story and how that was somehow equal to my story. There are, for the first time, I did a piece with the name of a painting of Magritte called The Muscles of the Sky. And for the first time, the muscles of the sky was a flying tree with fragments of a hang glider and fragments of color pieces, but it was a tree. So for the first time, that was like already, I would say, an announcement of what it was going to become my life. So it was clouds, yes, it was flying, but there was already the need to root. So I put on pause when going back to your question, after the building of the house that was basically saving a house and was very tough. It's been one of the biggest, toughest, most difficult projects, endeavors, adventures in my life. And so I finished the project after 6 months. I did it really fast, actually, pretty devastated. Still, there were so many things to do that took another 6 months. But during those 6 months, it was very important to understand seasons and to understand the land. So I definitely put my work as a full engaged 24/7 artist, just a few hours a day, but it was more of a reflection. The interesting thing is that I became a Byung-Chul Han too, doing my sabbatical year in the garden. Because when you live in an apartment or in a house in a residential area, you can just close the doors and nothing happens. Here, you basically live in a living ecosystem. That your living place, your house, let's put it that way, and you're invading that ecosystem. So you're the less important. So you have to come into terms with that living ecosystem to live in harmony. But for that, you need to walk a lot. You need to observe a lot. You need to learn the name of the plants. You need to name the name of the trees, of the flowers, of the insects, of the animals. At the beginning, I was, of course, the house was full of forest mice. And then you come to terms with them and say, listen, with the insects, the same. I was like so annoyed. Now, I grab them, I take them out of my house. This is not your space, this is yours. I observe the magic of spider webs on the windows sometimes, and I throw powder of turmeric. So then suddenly the whole spider web turns yellow, or chili powder turns red. So I observe, birds. I'm saving, animals, because I have a very, a very rapid chasing, hunting cat, and I'm always saving things. And then in spring, my full house is full of nests with eggs and birds, and it's fascinating. I have 2 cactus here in my living room because they can survive, but that's my own personal. And I do have a lemon and a lime tree, but those are indoor plants, just as kind of nostalgia. But all the rest is totally native.
Well, those are a little bit, I would say, the cactus and the lime, that's a connection to Mexico.
Absolutely.
For sure. I mean, I was thinking about, I know your work, for a long time. And I never would have thought that, like, I never would have made the connection, except for now hearing you talk about it, and in a different way, talking about your life in a different way of being rooted. I never would have said, oh, well, Erika is doing work with nature. Like, it never would have like put that connection. I would have said, the body, the feminine, flight, or even change, I would have thought that it was, I might have said those words around it, but I never would have said like a, kind of nature or rooting, and I know that some of your work was very, I'll say, like even the the butterflies with the photographs inserted in the center. Is there a name? What's the name of those?
Yeah, the imago butterflies with genitalia and
Exactly. That was sort of a looking inward, and now you're having this blossoming or rooting where you're like kind of looking outward, into the environment. Do you see it that way as a fundamental change?
yeah, well, but interestingly enough, I mean, probably because you think about the work, I know exactly which works you're referring to, but my work has always been related to nature, always. And I grew up in Mexico City, but my father had a cocoa bean and cattle ranch in South Mexico in Chiapas. So we basically grew, having that very profound experience and very profound connection with nature, with animals, with food, all the food chain, all the animals, life, death, killing, because it's part of, hunting, all the fruits, all the most exotic fruits, the cacao, the cocoa bean. And so, yeah, I mean, life has, close link to nature, jungle, trees, all the cycles have always been very close to me. That's why my work has always been, oscillating in between life and death, eros and thanatos, the life pulsation and the death pulsation. But also having, also I did a big series of paintings of environmental chaos and all the results or the devastating influence of money for environmental devastation. So I did these very chaotic landscapes with the monetized butterflies, where you don't know if the butterflies are the perpetrators or the victims of the environmental chaos itself. So, yeah, I would say nature had always been part of my language and my discourse, always. But it was nature in a sense of almost unattainable, almost always flying, always, in an ethereal, in motion way, always. And for the first time, that show of the grand tree and the improbable objects was a way to root nature. So the tree was was such a central piece of rooting, of understanding where I can connect, because I cannot keep on flying all the time. And so it was a need of rooting, though. And those trees that were very improbable were linked to women, were linked to how we exist. They're still fragmented, they're still, but they were a glimpse of the totemic figure of a female. And also, I've been fascinated by Heidegger's idea of the unheimlich, which is the being out of place, the being out of time. So that show was about that. It was so many elements together that were out of, there were always these elements that they didn't belong together, that I created these sculptures with juxtapose, with dichotomies, with elements that were apparently completely opposed, but in terms of its materiality, in terms of its reference, in terms of their concept, in terms of their identity or their given, gender. And all together, that gave that improbability of making something solid, or of making a sculpture that was standing on the three-dimensional space. I would have never been able to go back to my new body of work, or my new, or just retain or regain or reconnect with my art, if I had not had the chance of 4 seasons.
It's like a different marking of time. You talked about Heidegger and being in time and being out of time, and this idea of the unheimlich. And I think that that's, in some ways, it's like you feeling out of place, right? And then feeling in place with this new marking of time in a different way. And so I find that fascinating, really, of like feeling, as you said, untethered or unrooted. And then you have now this new rooting that's happening that allows you to see the marking of time in different ways that are perhaps different from a city life, or perhaps different from culturally they're different, in terms of geographic spaces, they're different. So
right. It's interesting because this moving around, living in so many different circumstances, countries, and so I'm gonna reconnect your questions and the assessment of arrivals. So for years in between, not feeling that I belong here in the United States, having lived in many different places, and the constant moving for, I would say, a good decade, I lived with a suitcase, going and traveling for so many exhibitions, biennials, museum shows, gallery shows worldwide. I was literally never put in a place more than 2 months.
Wow.
And I would say sometimes every week I was someplace different, and really traveling a lot. So that feeling and that sensation made me create a passport that was related to the monarch butterfly, and also the political situation of my country, Mexico, relationship with US, and the 3 countries that share this natural phenomena of the monarch butterfly growing, borning, traveling, and dying. And this life cycle is shared by 3 different countries.
Yes.
So they embrace the 3 landscapes embrace an insect, but the 3 landscapes differently have been destroying it for 3 very different reasons. I would say different reasons. I would say the most careful about the monarch butterfly has been Canada, but United States have been really crucial for its devastation. There was last week an article at the New York Times of an endangered species. Why? Because they have completely decimated fields that were filled with whatever they eat, or whatever flowers where they hatch the eggs, or the fields with natural native flowers that the larva eat, or the butterfly eats, because of rampant agriculture. And obviously those fields are filled with pesticides that definitely had decimated the monarch. And Mexico, deforestation of their sanctuaries where they do spend hibernation. They do the migration from Canada going through United States, and they finally stay there. But I'm not going to go through the whole natural scientific explanation of the cycle of the immigration of the monarch, but the passport. I remember very, very, very well that once we started long time ago, I know Emily for long, I would say centuries of creation.
Yes, we know each other for longer than we actually know each other.
And one day we had a meeting, and probably she might not like that I disclose this publicly, but we had like an artist meeting of friends that that we gathered to discuss precisely projects, ideas, and to get the artistic colleague feedback. And I came with a booklet made, homemade, and printing, computer materials, and it had on the cover the emblematic representation of my utopian passport of the United States of North America, that joined Canada, United States, and Mexico, and I took exactly the typography of the Canadian passport on the top, but I added the word passport, pasaporte in Spanish, so it was in French, English, and Spanish. Then the emblem I composed by taking exactly the passport of Canada, the top part with the lions and the kingdom flags, and then the eagle of United States, and then the bottom is the legs of the eagle of the Mexican passport with a cactus and the serpent. So I joined them together, and I actually took the exact typography from the United States passport, but I added the word United States of North America instead of United States of America. So this was this unifying passport. My being here in United States have been not easy, and I went through a crazy circumstance that I'm not gonna go through and share and tell right now, that I was in the verge of becoming undocumented or having to leave the country, living a whole life dream and studio and apartment here, leave behind and leave the country in 24 hours. But I'm not going to go through that. But that experience made me do this passport. So I remember in this meeting of artists that I had just this booklet with the emblem printed. And I remember Emily said, like, yes, so what?
I did. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, but I'm gonna go more profoundly on this. So yeah, so what? What's the purpose of a booklet that has an emblem of a passport of a utopian country? What's the purpose? There's no purpose here. And I said, no, it's the passport of the United States. But it's very, very common that we as artists have already, before doing a painting, I already know how it's going to end. But how you transmit that to a collector or a curator that comes and see some just traces on the white canvas, and then how it's going to end, but they don't know. So the same thing happened with the passport. And Emily, so like, what's the purpose of that? And I remember I said, well, I'm already showing it inside of an entomological box, as if it was a butterfly, but it's a passport. But the questioning, the kind of very discouraging comments of Emily and the questioning.
And you still have, it's great.
No, wait. made me understand that I needed to dive deeply and further and profoundly in a whole realm of politics, nationality, and so that the project was not only a passport, it had to be something else. So I went back, very sad, with my passport that had no meaning, and I created the whole video, the whole installation, performative installation of a passport office, and all the contents of the book. It was not only a booklet with white empty pages and a cover, but then I created the passport that I literally mimic a passport in terms of the security paper, all the content.
Yeah.
I created like line by line something that would mimic all the designs, pattern lines of security paper, even the little holes of the numbers, the stamps. I created every stamp, all related to three things: human rights, and all the human rights related to abuses when you try to cross another country, and how politics turn into a system of abuse. Second, obviously, the monarch butterfly and all the natural immigration process and its circumstances and endangering circumstances, and the NAFTA treaty. Because the NAFTA treaty precisely was a joint venture from the three countries that encompass this new passport, but also the monarch migration. But the NAFTA treaty was a treaty that was to protect free trade, commerce, and but never protecting humanitarian aspects. So the whole passport talks about those things, and it has a lot of information within the pages. And then the passport becomes a passport office where I enact an immigration officer and viewers, people, passerbys, because I have done the passport office in museums, galleries, art fairs, biennials, even in the streets as a pop-up passport office in a normal street, I would say, in the border of Mexico and US, in El Paso, Texas, for instance. That was one of the places. So I enact the passport officer, and then, as I was questioned by Emily, okay, a passport, and then what? So that question of Emily made me do all the then what. So the passport office is not only that you arrive to this fictitious, performative passport office, but there's a wheel of fortune that would allow you. I mean, you after filling a form, you fill out a form of a passport taken by the passport application of different countries altogether with a little questionnaire, and then that allows you to spin the wheel of fortune, and then that allows you the possibility, if you're lucky, to win a passport. And here I'm mocking the lottery visas, because when I made this passport, that was the time when the lottery visas existed, that those lottery visas that we all were very happy that existed and Europeans applied a lot, were actually a non-very democratic way of screening people. So, and not all the countries could apply. So it was already a screening process, very, now we live in a completely screening world with a cell phone, but before it wasn't. So the lottery visas were already a big screening process, and only allowed eligible countries, first world countries, to apply. And God forbid you, as they use this phrase, if in that screening they found something that you were not supposed to, or you were not eligible, or you were already marked, because you would never be able to enter the United States. So that was, one of the first sort of home security screening processes. And so it criticized that process. It exposed also the fact of the birthright citizenship, because it's not the same if you're born in Switzerland, in Namibia, in Mexico, in United States, or Yemen. It depends where you're born, the options and the possibilities you're going to have in your life.
And that you can also never let that go. Yeah. My dad was born in Kenya and but grew up in England, and everywhere he goes, he's always pulled aside because he was born in a particular place.
Exactly. So that's what it's called, birthright citizenship, and the privilege of where you're born. So all that is exposed in that precise passport project. And interestingly, it really hit the nerve, or hit the Achilles tendon, or it hit the need, or it hit the hope of so many different people, regardless of where it's shown, regardless of the social, economical, or cultural status or nationality. It's a very successful project, I would say, because it always hit in a place. It's a need, it's a human need, and it becomes more and more relevant with time.
Yeah.
Because of displacement, and because of precisely a project like international arrivals, that it's seeking to give the opportunities to people that with no wrongdoing become displaced, become a person without nation. I was in Syria 9 months before the war, part of an exhibition and part of a couple of projects, and basically all the people like you and me, that were prepared, that had studied, that had a house, that had a business, all the people I spent there for a month, they suddenly didn't have anything. And by no wrongdoing, they had to flee and leave home and leave possibilities, options, safety,
Yes.
money, house, everything, and go to a new country with absolutely nothing, like nothing. And not only that, but the stigma of being from a country that it's not liked. You know, we see today, you know, when the first images of the war in Ukraine came out, and but these are, you know, these are comments that you could hear in United States. Oh, but these are people like us. But why people in Syria were not people like us? Why people from Nicaragua, from El Salvador, from Mexico are not people like us?
Yeah, that definitely became the counter position of like this. Yes, we need to care about Ukraine, but what about all these other countries that we have just let, you know?
I mean, it's funny talking about your that moment years ago, and I don't actually remember the gathering of artists, but I remember you showing me the passport, and I'm so glad that it turned into this great project, because obviously I wasn't very articulate about what I was feeling at the moment, you know, just with my flip comment to you, what's the big deal? And I remember the feeling I had about it at the time was that it was obvious to me, in a maybe in a very naive way, that of course there should be no borders, and people should be allowed to be wherever they feel the need to be, wherever home is, wherever they can create a dream. And so in terms of an art piece, it was almost like this was a fact that mobility and, you know, that kind of acceptance shouldn't be an issue. But, you know, how you turn that into something that exposes more than just the ideal, but the issues around it, and why the stuff we've created in culture has put barriers up to that ideal. You know, that's where it became that, you know, asking those questions in terms of the art piece, you know, became very successful, you know, because of those questions that were presented.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I guess your question, so what? You know, that's so what, and then what? And what are you going to do with that? So turn into a big, profound research and further develop the passport. But also, I would say that I had, in terms of immigration, really crucial turning moments that probably a person from United States doesn't have those situations, because pretty much wherever you go, you have open doors. As I mentioned, I went to study to Italy when I was 18 years old. So here we are, two girls from a privileged, I would say, social economical status in Mexico. We're going to Italy to study. A friend of mine, a child from childhood, and me. And then we get pulled over at the airport in Milano and they question if we were going to go there because we were Mexicans to do prostitution. And we were there, you know, like we had already the schools, the house where we were going to stay, the Eurocentro, this language school, like very privileged sort of setting already defined. And they were thinking that we were going to go and do prostitution. So we were retained for some time there, you know, more than an hour. That was a first like warning flag that I was not privileged in terms of international flying or international welcoming, being from the country that I was. Then when I lived in Germany, I was with a German guy, you know, we lived together 7 years. And basically we had to come back because the applying for temporary residency, the second application was denied. And again, because I was Mexican. And I was an artist, and nothing of being an artist and Mexican was safe for them. That didn't mean I had anything secure or anything.
Doubly marked. Yeah.
So that was being an artist and being Mexican. That was the second time. Interestingly enough, when I come to United States, precisely because of being an artist, I was able to get the Ep1 visa. And that was the best privilege. And I had it for 3 periods. So talking about like 6 years. Well, in total, I had it 9 years. But then a whole other complication happened that was money, of not having enough money to live here. And then it's when I realized that it was not only nationality, but money. So first it was gender, then it was nationality, and then it was money. And in my projects, I use the butterfly not only to address freedom and mobility, but to address precisely the 3 different predetermined factors. You're born, and already there are 3 predetermined factors that are going to predetermine your possibilities and your opportunities in this world, which is gender, nationality, and economical status. And all my projects are always oscillating in these 3 specific topics. So that's what is crucial, the sense of where you come from, or where do you belong, or where do you find home.
Yeah, and I think that, for you, there are perhaps not other factors, but for many others, there's also, color of your skin and your physical ability or disability or mental health or invisible disabilities.
You know what's the first question as a woman when you apply for naturalization in the United States?
What?
Have you ever engaged in prostitution?
Oh.
That's the first question.
Wow. Wow.
That's the very first question when you're with an officer, and that where you have to swear and where you have to do it. The first question they throw to a woman is, have you ever engaged in prostitution?
And they
the
don't
second
ask, they don't ask
terrorism.
men? They don't ask men the same question?
Of course, I don't think so. But that's the first.
Yes.
And the second is terrorism, obviously. And the third is drugs.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
And
Yeah.
probably I would have answered, if you were not so terrified by the process, I would have said, oh, I wish. Then I would have had a financial fluidity that I didn't have at the beginning as being a starving artist in New York.
I was thinking about the passport project, and what an interesting thing it was to talk about for us here today, especially since we're a Mexican, a Canadian, and an American, sitting having the conversation. We're encompassing the United States of North America.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. I didn't know, Anna, you're Canadian.
I am, yes.
Yeah!
Fist bump.
Yes.
You need a passport. I hardly ever give a free passport. It has to be you have to appeal to your fortune. So we're gonna spin the wheel with a chance to win your passport.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your last project, Under the Same Sky We Dream.
Sure. So thank you for asking. It's a really good question, the Under the Same Sky We Dream project. And it's been very, very beautiful to be part of this interview podcast. I'm very supportive of all the causes that support immigration. I've supported so many different people. So precisely the difficulties that I endure to arrange my immigration status and my connection with all the workers in New York that come from, I would say I was very sensitive to all the Mexicans and South Americans, Central Americans, but basically, this sort of connection with Mexicans struggling and making it happen in the States somehow and sending money to Mexico. where when I lived in Mexico, we always saw them as them. They left the country, that was their choice. If they turn into being undocumented, that's their choice. But when I was here, I was one of them. It's not that I came undocumented, but I was on the risk of becoming undocumented because of wrongdoing of a lawyer and an ex-husband. But anyway, I was very sensitive to the cost, so I became one of them. I became one of the struggling immigrants in the United States trying to make a safety net, trying to make your life and your credibility, to build up credibility and a decent life of not only income, but in terms of living. So doing that, I mean, having endured that process, obviously I created the Passport Project. When I created the Passport Project and it became very successful internationally, I knew I could not just do that project. I knew that I needed to follow up and continue with the immigration subject, not because, it felt like a need, obviously, but also because the immigration circumstances were just getting worse and worse and worse worldwide. And in 2014, I remember seeing the first image in a newspaper of the first detention center for undocumented minors. That year, there was an unprecedented exodus of undocumented, unaccompanied minors that the United States didn't know how to handle, and they gave it to handle to corporation incarceration system. So the complexity of the detention centers of the border for the people that they don't understand why they are there or why they're afraid of people, why they don't allow them, that's a very naive perception. The situation or why they exist and why they increase and why there's so many and why they keep so many people, it's because it's a huge multi-billionaire business.
Yeah. Of course, but one is the institution of the business, but the other, the factor that this business likes to kind of reinforce over and over again to get support is this fear idea. Because otherwise the businesses wouldn't have support, and the institution, the kind of ecosystem wouldn't have that support unless they feed that fear. And,
correct.
Yeah, and that if that fear were dissipated, would the institutions still have legs?
Of course not, but the very interesting thing that you guys were saying about, that was off record, but what you were saying about bodies, the fear of the body, everything crosses but the body. Mm-hmm. So for me, and actually why all my projects are related to the physicality of the body, and obviously always and pretty much always addressed to the female body and sexuality, is that body is the ultimate form of frontier or border.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And why leaky bodies
already within a border that it's her body. And the idea that others could possess other bodies, that not even in your own body you're free, because body is a commodity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The body of you and me are a commodity for others. You pay taxes, your physicality, your presence, it's profitable for others.
Yeah, it's the labor market.
So you could only be free or be out of the loop or be out of the nationality, the gender, the whatever, if we didn't have body. So the only time where I could feel that I don't have body is when I'm in contact with nature. Because it's just as is. And nobody questions anything. A tree doesn't question its existence.
Is it also in contact with nature, but it's also removed from culture? Because culture is what, projects that
I would not say culture as itself.
Society, culture, the cultural constructs, the baggage.
The word culture, I would say more society systems, societal systems, the institutional idea that the body could be part of an institutional system, that the body does not belong to you. And what like a most radical scenario we're experiencing, that the body does not belong to you but belongs to a system, is the fact that now you cannot even have an abortion.
Exactly. And that it's come.
So it's not only your body, but whatever is inside of your body does not belong to you.
But I think economics more than anything, I think ultimately it all comes down to
money. Everything goes down to money.
Right.
Immigration goes down to money.
Right.
All the children in cages and dismembered families and everything is money. Having people in jails is like cars and hamburgers. The more you have, the more you sell, the more money you make to those corporations.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
It's despicable, yeah.
There were basically 2 photographs or 3 photographs that came out publicly in a newspaper in Arizona. And one of them completely struck my soul. It was so powerful that then I decided to make a project. Back then, nobody knew. But, since long time ago, I received information from the border, from undocumented process, so many blogs, so many websites. So that's how I found that. And it was not in the newspapers, like nationwide. It was not in the media nationwide. It was a local news. Then I decided to make the project. And again, people didn't even, when I started sharing the idea of that project, people didn't even see the relevance of that project. Remember those Mylar blankets and children in cages and these green pads on the floor? So it was that. And then when finally the first image came out, more into a nation sort of media, it was such a scandal that it was forbidden for press to go to those places. And then the news was tried to be buried, and people didn't talk about it. So I decided to do the project then. And what's the project about? It's as the Monarch Butterfly video installation, that it's a recreation of the Sanctuary of the Monarchs in Michoacan. This, Under the Same Sky We Dream, is sort of a recreation of that scenario into a gallery space. So my video installations always have a sound element, a video element, and an interactive element that gets displayed on the floor where you can experience. So it's an experiential sort of process where the viewer can actually dive, touch, see, and experience what I'm trying to convey permeated in their skin. Because it seems that the topics that I touch are topics that don't touch or do not permeate on the thick skin of corporate and politic interests.
Yeah, totally.
Or I would say white supremacist corporation politic interests. And sometimes I would say male interests too. So my idea of creating these experiences is that hopefully they permeate the skin, because once you touch something with your body, once your body has a movement, a motion, an interactive sort of submersive experience, you would never forget it. It's not like just a painting on a wall or a three-dimensional object on the floor, because all your senses are engaged. You have visual, you have auditive, and you have the touching experience as well.
I haven't seen the installation, but I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how it's set up.
So what you find first is a floating screen. It's a rear projection screen floating that has projected a sky, and the screen is cut out with the shape of the border of Mexico and United States. So the northern border of Mexico, the southern border of United States. The outline, it's what gives shape to the floating screen. And the projection is a time lapse of more than 35,000 still photographs of the sky at the proximity of the border of El Paso, Texas and Ciudad Juarez, of the passing of clouds from dawn to sunset. So all joined together create a video, a time lapse of dawn to sunset in 9 minutes. And the passing by of clouds and clouds and clouds. And why I chose that, it's because the immigration legality process, the piece is linked to the DREAM Act, has been in a dormant status. All the dreamers and DACA and the bill of Congress that was supposed to be passed that would have given the possibility to a legal path of immigration to undocumented children that came to United States without wrongdoing before the age of 5, that when they came as children, or other teenagers that came here and completely were embedded already in the system, education system. They don't even, of United States, they don't even speak their own language. They're Americans. They don't know any other country. They were brought here to United States before the age of 5.
Yeah.
And they did nothing wrong. They were brought by need of their parents. So the piece is based on the DREAM Act. So the dormant stage of that bill of Congress and the policies and the possibility of these people that are now adults, young adults, to be legal, to be documented, to have a normal living, access to education, access to health, access to a real job, has been dormant, has been just passing like the clouds. And also the idea of the clouds passing is that they pass on top of the border without any problem, right? And then you enter, you cross underneath the screen, underneath the border, that has also a conceptual process. You cross underneath the border, and what do you enter to? Not to the dream. You enter to a detention center for undocumented unaccompanied children, with all those blankets, Mylar blankets, with all those green floor pads that are made by the incarceration factory system. They're exactly those. I was able to acquire them from a factory in North Carolina that manufactures all the things that you see in a jail, right? And then on top of each little bed with a Mylar blanket, there's a book with a lamp that is called the Dream Book. And when you open the book, that is full of photographs and text, the photographs is a document, a photography documentary that I did for over 5 years at the border of El Paso, Texas and Ciudad Juarez, that actually documents the transition of the border. And in a place that before you had like the not a fence, it was just like garden, fencing, like the squares,
Yep.
until what it's today. So all that photographic document, it's there. Also the transition of the landscape in the vicinity of the border, and how it transformed in time in terms of graffiti, in terms of being hardened, in terms of being impenetrable. the children that grew up there when they were kids and now when they are young, teenagers. And the text, it's a conceptual artist book. The text is the Dream Act, the Bill of Congress that was never passed, turning into concrete poetry. So it's displayed in the book into very specific conceptual paragraphs, and the typography used, it's done in a way that exalts certain phrases and has a visual, rhythmic conceptual poetry, concrete poetry, visual poetry that follows the cadence of the sound that you're hearing in the space. That it's the song. It's a song made out of the Dream Act, sung by Magos Herrera, the Mexican singer, with that it's only the vocal sound without instruments. So it's the harmonic vocal singing of the Dream Act turn into a song, that also the book follows that cadence as if you're following, the book of the song. And the beauty of the song and the voice of the singer is that it kind of feels like a mother singing to the lost child, regardless if it's the mother that sent the child to United States or it was a mother that came to work here and left the son, the daughter, their children back in their original country. And the musicality of the voice, it's based on native rhythms. So you can but it's not really evident, but my purpose was to have certain tonalities of mariachi, certain tonalities of a lullaby, certain tonalities of a child's song, children, elementary or kindergarten schools, the tonality of jazz, blues, African American diaspora created sounds. So it's a very profound sort of amalgamation of sounds that are close to the core of the heart of a mother and the native cultures or the original cultures where immigrants come from.
It sounds so powerful. Are you showing it anywhere soon?
No, well, it was going to be, I was going to have 2 different museum shows before COVID, so I have to get back to that. We got hit by COVID and I got hit by saving a house and and a forest. So now I'm getting into that finally. But you can see all these projects in my website, erikaharrsch.com, ErikaHarrsch.com.
Great. Thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been so rich. There's lots to digest and lots to think about. And just thank you for sharing your time.
I was thinking when you were talking about an experience of an installation and how you experience it with your whole body and all of your senses. And it made me think of your first comment about talking about home as the body. And then the Heideggerian unheimlich, unhomed idea of feeling out of your home. And I think it's kind of a powerful thing that art can do. By asking the right questions, we can have our homes kind of shaken up, or what we took for granted in our stability, in our bodies, in our rootedness. And
it's about discomfort for me.
Yes.
Like taking you out of that zone of comfort and putting you into another zone where you think, oh yeah, okay, this is how many people live, think, process, whatever.
The best thing that a human being can achieve is the possibility of a home, the possibility of the tranquility of a home, of a space that where you can accomplish your dreams, that you can achieve peace. And I'm gonna close with a quote by Edmund James that it's on my Dream Act book, that it's part of the installation. So this is like on the first few pages of the book. You will never walk far enough, pilgrim piercer, horizons full. The earth once learned is a prison. Its bars are all roads counted. You will never dream far enough. The ocean, the enemy, it's unreason. But the sky, the blue sky out of reach, is a restrained murmur from stones, in love which time turns to boundary stones. And it, I was looking for a very specific quote for me to really understand what home is, that it's rooted to nature. And when I pass so much time on the desert of the border and walking in neighboring deserts, in both in Mexico and United States, and I love the desert as well. So that feeling of walking and walking, always looking for that place where you can rest, where you can feel that you belong, that you can feel that everything is part of one and one is part of everything. That's very close in this beautiful quote, and only nature conveys for me that possibility of feeling that I'm part of everything and everything is part of me, and that time stops and everything has always been contained in a second.
Welcome.
You have arrived at your destination.
Bem-vindo ao Pinto Place.